while we try to steer folks toward the good, some folks do end up in Northern Virginia. I don't know. Yeah, hard.
Boo.
Nobody said they had a problem. Nobody said they had a problem. Nobody said they had a problem. The bill passes both chambers, and then magically a veto appears.
On this episode of Pod Virginia.
Well, I don't know how much of it is strategy and how much of it is just pettiness.
Lobbying 101.
That was one of the stupidest examples of trying to influence people.
We're joined by the power duo who teaches a class on lobbying at the University of Richmond.
Wow, what a question.
We're joined by Chris Saxman.
Everybody has a lobbyist, and sometimes 3 and 4 acting on their behalf, and they don't even know it.
And Beck Stanley.
When you're genuine, you're taken as authentic. And when you're authentic, you're trusted.
Plus, we go through the governor's vetoes.
The governor just blew up anything that they might have had an agreement on.
All that and so much more on this episode of Pod Virginia. I'm Michael Pope.
I'm Thomas Bowman.
And this is Pod Virginia, a podcast that's so popular it can override any veto.
Later in the show, we'll get a master class in lobbying from Beck Stanley and Chris Saxman. They're two lobbyists who teach a class at the University of Richmond School of Professional and Continuing Studies, and they joined us to teach Lobbying 101. It's a little different show than we typically give you, but we know you like to hear from people who make the sausage, and so stick around for that because you'll get to hear directly from the sausage makers themselves.
Yeah, they talk about books that they teach in their classes. They talk about concepts that they teach to people who want to be lobbyists. You know, Thomas, this is a growing industry, and year after year, we see more lobbyists in Richmond, which means we need more professional training and classes like this one that Beck Stanley and Chris Saxman teach.
Yeah, you know, I've always been somebody who says, well, if you don't like the fact that there's deals getting made in a closed back room, then you need to increase the number of people who are in that back room, right? So if you're worried about some, highfalutin, powerful lobbyists, well, the solution is to have more of them and have more interests represented in the backroom negotiations.
One other point about lobbyists that I think is often overlooked is when you say the word lobbyist, people automatically have this vision in their head of the well-heeled lobbyist from the major firm that has a lot of money. And they don't think of, for example, like the Virginia Poverty Law Center has a lobbyist, and the city of Alexandria has a lobbyist. And lobbyists are often the experts and the people that you go to with the questions. And oftentimes, Thomas, as you well know, they actually write the legislation. So it's super important to meet lobbyists on any topic that you're working on and get a sense of who they are and what their interests are, which is why we frequently feature lobbyists on our show.
Yeah, so stick around for that. It's definitely worth listening to.
Okay, let's get to the news. Governor Glenn Youngkin is vetoing more than 24 bills. Now, to put some context on that, that's more vetoes than recent governors had in their first year in office. Bob McDonnell had 0 vetoes his first year in office. McAuliffe had 10 vetoes, and Northam had 20 vetoes in his first year. So Youngkin is coming in strong with his veto pen. And some Democrats are not happy, especially considering they felt like they were blindsided by all these vetoes. Here's audio of Senator Scott Survell talking about one of his bills the governor unexpectedly vetoed.
That bill went right through the legislature. Nobody objected. The industry stood up repeatedly and said they were okay. Administration had people in the room. Nobody said they had a problem. The bill passes both chambers, then magically a veto appears. The way this process is supposed to work, if you have a problem with the bill, you bring it up during session so you can talk about it. Maybe you can make some adjustments. Maybe you can make some changes. Maybe you can find a consensus because we work together to try to reach good policy.
So governors are not required to work with lawmakers during the session. But the point that Survell was making there is that, why didn't the people who are representing the governor in the governor's office stand up in these committee meetings and explain what their issue was? And most of these bills, you had somebody from the governor's office there in the room. They did not stand up and voice objections to many of these bills that the governor ended up vetoing. So when the vetoes actually were announced, Thomas, this took a lot of people by surprise. What do you make of the strategy here of the governor and the governor's people blindsiding all these lawmakers?
Well, I don't know how much of it is strategy and how much of it is just pettiness. Normally someone from the governor's office would testify for or against a bill and explain the administration's position, if any. And if the administration says, we don't like this bill, the legislature, they're going to decide right then and there whether or not they're going to send it to the governor and pass it or not. And, when your own party has a majority or a minority, like they would probably just kill it, right? So this is not done. It's clearly rubbing a lot of important people the wrong way. And the other thing tied to these vetoes is actually no reason at all. So usually a governor is going to provide some kind of even veiled legitimacy in their reason behind making a veto. But this governor is ham-handed. He's just doing it out of pure pettiness and spite, especially when it comes to Adam Ebbin.
Well, yeah, speaking of Ebbin, he won the award for most vetoes. I think there were like 9 bills of Senator Ebbin's that were vetoed by the governor. And so Senator Ebbin was part of a press conference where he was asked about that. Like, why is it, do you think the governor vetoed so many of your bills? And this was his reaction.
He seems to take issue with people who voted against his nomination of Trump EPA Administrator Andrew Wheeler to be the Virginia Secretary of Natural Resources, which is why I think he vetoed so many of my bills.
All right, so the politics of revenge is not unheard of in Richmond, and many actions actually can be explained this way. Democrats are certainly not above exacting revenge on their rivals, so this is not a sort of one-party issue here. What do we make of Youngkin rejecting so many of Ebbin's bills, perhaps motivated by the fact that here's the chairman of the influential Senate Privileges and Elections Committee who oversaw the rejection of a key member of Youngkin's cabinet?
I think the governor needs to be really careful here because what goes around comes around. There are a lot of things that legislators can do that they deliberately choose not to do because they don't want to burn each other's houses down because they're all in it together, right? And so, yes, you can, for example, pull every single bill off the uncontested calendar and force the patrons to explain it, force debate on the bill, and just gum up the works and slow it down. And you can do that to be petty, sometimes to people you don't like. But the other side can also do it to you, right? So it might be a while until Democrats are in a position to be able to respond proportionally, but they will respond.
All right, well, overriding a veto takes a supermajority in the House and also in the Senate. And that means a bill like Delegate Sia Price's bill giving local governments the authority to crack down on slumlords, well, that bill probably will not be able to overcome the veto. It would require a whole lot of votes. She would actually need to pick up votes that she did not have in the session, and that seems probably unlikely. But then again, there's other kinds of bills. Like there's one bill from Delegate Nadarious Clark of Portsmouth that we talked about on our podcast a couple weeks ago. He has a bill that would create a new statute of limitations on medical debt. It's a 3-year statute of limitations. Wildly popular. It passed with overwhelming majorities in the House, overwhelming majorities in the Senate. Plus, Delegate Clark tells me that he actually worked with Republican Attorney General Jason Miyares on the bill, and it still got vetoed. So how are Republicans actually approaching this idea of the veto session? Because, Delegate Clark will be asking for a vote on overriding his veto. So you're going to get Republicans who are probably going to change their vote. They're going to move from a yes to a no so that they don't override the veto and make the governor angry. So my colleague, Jod Khalil, he talked to Republican Delegate Tony Wilt of Rockingham about how the Republicans are approaching this veto session. And this is what he told Jed.
We'll take it issue by issue, but that's, you got to be honest, that's a kind of a hard lift to undo what the governor's done. But if it's that important to the whole body, then we'll see how that shakes out.
Yeah, we'll see how this shakes out. And I'll be watching the vote on this Nadarious Clark bill to create a new statute of limitations for medical debt. One of the no votes was Republican Whip Michael Webert. Now, he'll need to persuade 23 House Republicans to change their vote from a yes to a no. And look at this list of people who voted in favor of this Nadarious Clark bill. It includes Speaker Gilbert. He's going to need to change his vote. Majority Leader Kilgore. He's going to need to change his vote. Now, I'm pretty sure that that's what's going to end up happening. All these Republicans are going to switch their votes. But the end process here is they're going to do that to avoid, insulting the governor. Meanwhile, people in danger of being harmed by medical debt are going to get screwed. Is this any way to run things?
Well, look, what the governor's done is hand Democrats a really easy and popular campaign issue because their own people, Republican voters, are also in medical debt, especially in rural hospitals. So, yes, it's rare for a veto to actually even get overridden because the threshold of 2/3 majority in both chambers is an incredibly high bar to meet.
Hasn't happened since McDonnell was governor.
Yeah, and I actually pulled up that story. So the last time the General Assembly overrode a veto was when Bob McDonnell tried to veto a bill on medical malpractice caps. And that increased the state's cap on medical malpractice awards from $2 million to $3 million over 20 years. And Republican delegate at the time from Fairfax, Dave Albo, said it gives predictability. It's only a 2.5% increase, and it's a pretty darn good solution. So he was willing to go buck his own party leader. But this puts Speaker Gilbert and Republicans in a very awkward position because on the one hand, you want to be somebody who sticks to your word, right? So if you say, I'm going to vote for the bill, you vote for the bill. If you say, I oppose your bill, I'm going to vote against it, you vote against it. If the whole legislature supported a bill unanimously, now the majority party in the House and a significant minority party in the Senate have to now vote against this popular enough bill to have gotten through, in many cases, unanimously. So that's going to be easy campaign fodder in some cases for Democrats to beat Republicans up. And so Glenn Youngkin, not knowing what he's doing or not caring and being willing to burn it all down, this is not good long-term for the Virginia Republican Party. This sets a really bad precedent. And there's other balls in the air because the Senate and the House budget negotiators are trying to come to a resolution on what to do with this budget. And Senator Janet Howell from Fairfax said something to the effect of, this has set the budget negotiations back quite a bit. I don't know if it's a threat. I don't know if it's just a statement of fact, but the reality is, the governor doing this really just blew up anything that they might have had an agreement on.
Interesting. All right. Well, I want to end our discussion on the vetoes on a comic note. So some of the governor's vetoes did not seem to be all that well thought out. Check out this audio from Senator Dave Marston explaining his reaction to the governor's veto of one of his bills.
The governor's arguments against the bill were based on the introduced bill and not the amendments that were made by both the House and the Senate as it went through the process. They just went back to the introduced bill to make their arguments for vetoing the measure, which is, really kind of strange, and it shows you the level of effort that went into this.
So what do you make, Thomas, of the governor's veto explanation for Marston's bill being aimed at the original version of the bill and not the version of the bill that landed on his desk?
I think that the story is one of two things and possibly a combination of them. Either the people writing these explanations for the governor's office don't understand how to read LIS, and admittedly, it's not the most intuitive platform. Or the second option, they care more about the politics than the policy itself. And one of those reasons could be Glenn Youngkin is trying to audition for vice president.
Well, clearly, I think he looks in the mirror and sees a president of the United States, and the governor, it seems to me, has lots of people around him who are telling him, you can do it, you can do it, you can do it. And yeah, I think a lot of his actions are kind of aimed at being somebody on the national stage and not necessarily doing what's best for Virginia. That's certainly what Democrats are accusing him of.
Yeah, and we didn't really get into it in this episode, but the governor also had many small amendments to the bills. And so those actually could potentially get overridden because it only takes a simple majority, or 50 plus 1%, to do that. And let me give you an example of just how petty some of these amendments were. So there was a bill to provide restitution to a person who was wrongfully convicted. The governor removed a single dollar from that sum. The governor amended a bill that was passed without controversy by taking away $1 from a person who is wrongfully convicted. That is how petty this man is.
All right, before we go, let's get to some listener mail. Now, some of our listeners were interested in, Thomas, something that you said about the gas tax holiday on one of our recent podcasts. You said, quote, "A gas tax holiday is a targeted attack on the parts of Virginia that did not vote for Glenn Youngkin because it cuts funding for public transit and rail in urban areas." And then you said this is a handout to the fossil fuel interests. Well, that prompted some discussion on Twitter, where at Nita Morjani said, quote, "Absolutely fascinating that he," meaning you, Thomas, "that he comes up with that rationale. I've never heard the R's make such a reference. To me, it's a populist move, easy for the Republican base to understand." So, Thomas, when you look at the gas tax holiday, I would actually have to agree with this Twitter user. This is easy to understand. This is the kind of thing that speaks to the base. What do you make of this debate on the gas tax holiday?
Yeah, well, I mean, she's absolutely right. Of course, the Republicans aren't making any such reference because most people, if you're not Donald Trump, are smart enough to not say the quiet part out loud. And yes, the Republican base does understand this. And we also said in the past episode that the gas tax does hurt people who live in rural communities where you have to drive a lot to get to your job. So as far as a populist move goes, yeah, that's the pretext. That's exactly what Glenn Youngkin is counting on, is that he's hoping people see it as immediate relief at the pump. But we know that the true story is a little bit more nuanced and complex than that. And so, to dismiss that when we know that what this gas tax holiday will do is pull funding from public transportation in Virginia, I mean, it's intellectually dishonest to even pretend like anyone would think it's innocent.
All right, well, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll get a master class in lobbying from Beck Stanley and Chris Saxman. They teach a class at the University of Richmond School for Professional and Continuing Studies, and they join us next to give us a crash course in Lobbying 101. We'll be right back.
This is Philip Scranage, and you're listening to Pod Virginia, my favorite podcast for all things Virginia politics.
And we're back on Pod Virginia, and it's time for class. Get your notebooks out and sit down at your desks, students, because you're about to get a master class in lobbying. We're joined by the Power Duo, who's part of a team that teaches a class on lobbying at the University of Richmond School of Professional and Continuing Studies. We're joined by the Executive Director for Virginia Free, Chris Saxman. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be here. Thanks for inviting me on.
We're also joined by the Director of Government Affairs for the Virginia Agribusiness Council, who started this course at the university and who many in the media seem to know. They even named him the Sergeant at Arms for the press room at the Pocahontas building, although we were not able to fact check that. Beck Stanley, thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much, Mr. Bowman. Mr. Pope, thank you for having me.
All right, class is in session. So as a reminder, folks, we've got some books on the syllabus, and I want to go through them and talk about why they're important to understanding the art and the science of lobbying in Virginia. First up is The Three Languages of Politics, Talking Across the Political Divides by Arnold Kling. Another book on the syllabus is Words That Work. It's not what you say, it's what people hear by Frank Luntz. We also want you to pick up the 1936 classic, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. Okay, Chris Saxman, let's start with one of these books, the Arnold Kling book, which describes three tribal coalitions in American politics: the progressives, the conservatives, and the libertarians. The author says it's important to be fluent in these three languages of politics. Why is it important to learn to talk across the political divide?
Well, it's not necessarily across the political divide. It's appealing to the people who are in politics and you're trying to influence them in languages they understand. The conservatives, Mr. Kling's thesis is they are trying to protect civilization from the barbarians. Progressives, on the other hand, are trying to lift the oppressed from the oppressor. And libertarians are trying to protect against the coercion of the state. And if you can change your language or shift your messaging to appeal to those base instincts within the conservative, progressive, or libertarian thinking, you can be more persuasive with your particular issue or legislation. And it's getting in their lane, if you will, versus coming at them with language that they just don't understand and thinking that they can't take back to their districts and go, oh, this one resonates with me because it's going to help the oppressed in my district overcome the oppressor, or this is going to protect our civilization from further destruction from the barbarians. And you put those in those actual words, but in words that tap into that deep, almost in the marrow DNA thinking that people have.
Okay, I'm curious about the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, which I read in high school. This is a Depression-era book written by Dale Carnegie, who is teaching a class on public speaking. It's essentially a book version of his class, which humorist Sinclair Lewis once described as a method to teach people to smile and bob and pretend to be interested in other people's hobbies, precisely so that you may screw things out of them. Charles Manson said he used what he learned from the book in prison to manipulate women into killing on his behalf. Beck Stanley, what's the deal with this book?
Wow, what a question, Thomas. I'm not surprised to hear that. It's a powerful text, and it's one that I believe it was published initially in the early 30s. And just like the skills that are being taught in this class, they can be used for good and they can be used for bad. And while we try to steer folks toward the good, some folks do end up in Northern Virginia. I don't know. Yeah, hard to wonder. But that really, it's about that helping people and being genuine and sincere in your work and knowing that what you're lobbying is a good cause. We try to instill that in our students through this text, because when you're genuine, you're taken as authentic. And when you're authentic, you're trusted. And that trust is a vital part of this career, any career in advocacy. And Carnegie really taps into that in that text.
All right, well, let's move on to the Frank Luntz book, Words That Work. It's not what you say, it's what people hear. It has chapter titles like The 21 Words and Phrases for the 21st Century and The 10 Rules for Successful Communication. It explains why pharmaceutical companies ditch the word treatment in favor of words like prevention and wellness. Chris Saxman, why are words so important, and how can they be used tactically as weapons?
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily about weapons, but they're certainly a vehicle for communication. And to the end you seek, the right words you use are absolutely critical. I like to tell our class eventually on issues, when you're trying to come up with strategies and tactics, you're going to have to get down to about 5 words. If it can't fit in a bumper sticker and you can't have it resonate with someone that quickly, you're going to be in a very difficult spot, because there are so many other words that are attacking the conscious level thinking of so many people. You have to cut through things with very specific words. And we can take recent examples of campaigns. Regardless of what you say about Donald Trump, drain the swamp and make America great again. Those are great words. Those are great taglines. Hillary Clinton's I'm with her. That was one of the stupidest examples of trying to influence people who were in the campaign. And, Barack Obama was brilliant. Hope and future. And he was just brilliant at conveying and taking words and having them resonate with you. And that's what made him a powerful speaker. And they We've had so many examples over the years. Morning in America with Reagan, Man from Hope, Bill Clinton. Hope is a continuing thing for the Democrats, and it's a very powerful one. And if you use those and you can use them well and convey them well, you're going to be more successful and more persuasive in your profession if you're trying to advocate for certain things. And advocate itself is not necessarily lobbying. It's, if you break it down in Latin, it means to call forward. It means to bring forward someone's thinking, to call toward your position. And we try to emphasize on what the goal of advocacy really is. It's not to, everyone has the Jack Abramoff model of lobbying. It's quite different when you're lobbying for the Cancer Society or the Humane Society or for, disabled children. The words still are very, very important to resonate with your target audience.
Yeah, and the power of language in this profession and what we teach in the class, it can't be overstated. Just recently in Virginia, Governor Youngkin and his campaign masterfully rehashed the spirit of beloved community, which was a Bonhoeffer philosophical religious idea that Martin Luther King tapped into later, and most recently the governor successfully used in his campaign and in the transition. And just like that, those rehashes of Reagan's slogan to Trump's, and what Luntz talks about in the text is how essentially powerful language can be reused over and over and over again for companies, campaigns, and in your daily communications. And Luntz even explains in that book how to talk yourself out of a speeding ticket. And I've used it. It works.
I'm going to have to read that book because I do have a lead foot. All right, but let's talk about your class at the University of Richmond School for Professional and Continuing Studies. It's ostensibly about lobbying, but I get the sense it's about something more, essentially that everything is about persuasion, persuading a university to pay you for teaching a class, or persuading lobbyist professors to appear on a podcast to talk shop. What kind of personality traits make for a really good lobbyist?
Personality traits, hard work, discipline, focus, integrity.
I'd say integrity is at the top of the list. I mean, being genuine and authentic and being able to be trusted every year, that's skill number one.
I would say the word integrity is not the first word that you would get out of people if you say describe a lobbyist.
Oh, without question. They're because they work with so many people so closely, you have to be able to trust the person with whom you're dealing. When I first came to the legislature, we were told that the lobbyists, they're not what you think. They are subject matter experts. They are here working on behalf of clients, many of whom live in your district, and they'll have multiple clients, and you'll use them for multiple sources of information. But there are those who are very trustworthy, and most of them will come in. The good ones will come into your office and say, "Here's the bill. This is what we say about the bill, and here's what our opponents say about the bill. Ultimately, it's a policy decision, and it's your decision to make, but here's why we think our position is the right one."
Two traits that we really push and try to instill in the class are being able to network and build relationships and quickly develop subject matter expertise. That's why lawyers are such good lobbyists. They're really good at condensing and reading a lot of information very quickly and then forgetting it and moving on to the next issue. So those are two as well.
I'm wondering about trends in the industry. So some organizations have in-house lobbyists, like Beck. I think you're an in-house lobbyist, right? And then other organizations hire contract people from these big firms like McGuire Woods or Williams Mullen or one of those. Beck, I'm wondering what the trends are in the industry. I feel like in recent years, I've seen a lot more lobbyists wandering around Capitol Square. Is this an industry that's blowing up?
I don't think it's blowing up so much as people are realizing that you need to have someone down there on your behalf, because you never know how the law can change in a very small way that the everyday person might not notice, and it can have drastic impacts on entire industries. Some associations and companies like to have a reliable presence and an in-house lobbyist who is there year in and year out working on the same issues. Other companies face very niche issues that require a subject matter expert just for maybe 1 or 2 years. And so the contract angle makes sense in those situations. And then you've got folks who specialize in the grassroots and grassroots organization. And then you've got others who have carved out social media lobbying, influencing, developing, and generating third-party expressions of support or opposition There's a wide array of lobbyists out there, and they will all cash your checks, I promise you.
I think that the growth of the industry or the growth of the people involved in not necessarily lobbying per se, but also government and external relations is growing because of the complexity of their industries, the involvement of government at the state, local, and national level necessitates. I mean, I would advocate for businesses, if you have over 50 people, you should have someone in your organization dedicated to government relations, and that whether that means registering to lobby. There's just so many things you need to be aware of that will impact your business or your organization that it should take some professional expertise in this area. But it's also, I think a lot of businesses are walking past a lot of opportunities to take advantage of changes in the law. I would sit there in committee or subcommittee going, oh my God, I wish I was in this industry. I would kill it what these guys are trying to do with this legislation. And, it's not necessarily it was good policy or bad policy, but you see the door opening to just an incredible array of possibilities. Yeah, there's a lot of opportunity out there in this space. You're not just mitigating downside, but there's also an opportunity upside.
Okay, one final question on relationship building. Now, this seems like the kind of thing that's not really an academic pursuit so much. It's the kind of thing you learn by witnessing other people do it. How do you teach somebody networking skills?
We talk about that a lot, and it's really about seizing networking opportunities, seizing opportunities to get out and meet people, and taking the time to stick around Richmond, stick around downtown, a few extra hours after the last committee adjourns to get to know people in social settings beyond at the Capitol. I think it's not something you can teach, but I think it is just being a genuine person and understanding and spending the time to get to know someone and what your friends care about and what they're passionate about. But also, it's easy to go too far. And a lot of times, people know that a lobbyist and a legislator are really good friends. It's really easy to call them out on the conflict. And so you can go too far with it as well.
The fact of the matter is developing a relationship is just taking an interest in the other person and vice versa. And, working on a relationship, if you have to work with the person, you might as well get to know them. And, most of the people that are in the legislature or work on the legislative side professionally, they're very interesting people. They're very intelligent people. The vast majority of them are well-intended, interesting, intelligent, but it takes time to develop relationships. And unfortunately, what happens more and more in the lobbying world these days is you get siloed up with people from your own party. And you really miss an opportunity to get to know people and be more effective because the Democrats, they'll send this Democratic lobbyist to go take care of that Democratic legislature. And that's how certain lobbying groups will carve up the work, assuming that there's a political connection there. But, far more effective ways to develop a personal relationship with people. So you get to know them. And that happens for legislators too. So often we'd be in a meeting, whether it was a caucus or a committee meeting, subcommittee, and we'd talk about someone wanting a bill and something passed, and they'd say, well, that's all that person wants is X, Y, and Z because they read it in the newspaper or someone made a floor speech or whatever it was from the political context. And I'd say, no, that's not what they want. What they really want is X, Y, and Z in their district. They're like, well, how do you know? Because I asked them and I listened. And, when you get to know somebody, you can understand what they truly want and they truly need. And that's part of the interesting element of politics. It's just, it's a fascinating field.
And it's something that some of our other instructors that I'll give a shout out to, Rob Shin, Stephanie Kane, Chelsea Bennett, excellent lobbyists. They're all really, really good at building lasting friendships with not just legislators, but other lobbyists. And so when it comes time to build a coalition with other industries, they're connected in all these other industries that you need to really add a lot of heft to your efforts. And so it goes both ways. It's not just the elected officials, but your fellow colleagues as well.
All right, we're running out of time for this episode, but I want to give you an opportunity for any final thoughts or to say something that we didn't cover yet. Chris Saxman, why don't you go first?
Lobbying is an honorable profession. It has gotten a lot of bad press, ostensibly because of bad things that have happened to the industry in Washington, D.C., Jack Abramoff, the scandals and whatnot. It's regulated. There's really good people in there. There's always bad actors in any industry. But lobbying itself is important because everybody has a lobbyist, and sometimes 3 and 4 acting on their behalf, and they don't even know it. And that's one of the funnier things to consider. Is just the simple things you do every day. There's typically a lobbyist behind that industry, whether it's at the grocery store or the gas station or the home builders or the realtors. There's just a connection to you on so many levels, not just within your own profession. And it's incumbent upon, frankly, all citizens, all Americans, to be aware of the democratic process and to know who's representing you. If you want to be more effective, reach out to those who are working on your behalf.
Beck Stanley, any final thoughts?
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for having us. And just to close, our students go on to lead in this field. We have some former students who are doing things bigger and better than I ever will. And it's so heartwarming to see them up there in Richmond and DC, and now we're also accepting students from other states because the class is now virtual. And so if you're listening, take a look at our website, Richmond, spcs.richmond.edu, or Google University of Richmond Grassroots Lobbying, and check it out. We'd love to have you.
All right. Well, that's our show today. Chris Saxman and Beck Stanley, thank you so much for this Lobbying 101 session. And for more information, check out the website for the University of Richmond School of Professional and Continuing Studies. I'm Thomas. That's Michael. This has been Pod Virginia.
Pod Virginia is a production of Jackleg Media. Our producer is Arian Ballou. Our social media manager is Emily Cottrell. And our advertising sales manager is David O'Connell.
Find us on Facebook or Twitter. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And hey, write a review on Apple Podcast. It really helps people find the show.
We'll be back next week with another episode of Pod Virginia.